versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Henderson at council table and his colleagues nearby. We have 1 hour and 5 minutes left of this tape, and I promised that we would stop at 2:30. We could 2:40 is okay? Should we finish the tape?
They can wait on me. They're getting lots of money out of me.
Okay. Good. Okay, excellent. So let's not waste any more time. Let's go forward, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Resuming where we left off, 31 minutes, 48 seconds.
Witness until we try to return at 1:30 p.m. So Mr. Durst is present with Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. DeGuerin, and Mr. Williams, Bailey, Milius, Mr. Yaroslavsky, Mr. Piñata. Here for the people, the witness has resumed the witness stand, Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Kaufman, you remain under oath. And Mr. Bailey, you may resume your examination of the witness. Keep your voice up, please.
Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. The attempted production of the Dreyfus Affair project caused you to travel to New York.
Correct.
And I believe you testified that, at least later in the project, it caused you to remain in New York for a more significant period of time.
That's right. And by the way, I want to, if I could I make a correction to a statement that I made earlier?
If the attorney wants.
Sure.
Okay, you had asked me if Mr. Durst had invested in the musical, and I had forgotten. Yes, he did invest in the musical, and I've always been very grateful for that participation. For some reason, it was a long time ago, so I just wanted to put that in there.
All right, you may continue.
Thank you. And was that participation by Mr. Durst on his own, or at the request of Susan Berman?
I don't know. I would assume that he got involved because Susan was involved.
Did you know Mr. Durst before you knew Susan?
No.
Did you know Mr. Durst outside of Susan?
No.
Was the Dreyfus Affair project something that was publicly known for investors to find on their own?
Well, not publicly. We didn't put out advertisements, but we contacted people interested in this.
Okay. So we were talking about, for a more significant period of time, it caused you to be away from Los Angeles and New York. What was that period of time? How long were you at the end staying on your own in New York?
I would say over a period of about a year, I guess.
Okay. And for that year at least, the children stayed with you?
That is correct.
Okay. When was it that you moved back to Los Angeles?
I would say it was about 93, 92, 93, right in there.
And what was happening with the Dreyfus Affair project at that particular time?
We had done a preview, we had run previews of it, and then after previews, we were not able to raise the additional amount of capital we needed to go on with the full production. And that's when I did another show there before I left, an off-Broadway thing that I did for briefly, and then I came back to LA full-time.
So when you came back to Los Angeles, had the Dreyfus Affair project already failed?
Yes, it was over.
And when you moved back to Los Angeles, did you move back in with Susan Berman?
I did initially, but we were at that time starting to kind of go our separate ways, and after a period of time, we did live a different lives.
Did the relationship end?
Certainly the family love relationship ended, but we maintained friendship.
Did you and Susan break up?
Yeah, yes.
Who broke up with who?
Oh. I wouldn't want to carry, I wouldn't really want to say me or her. It was us. It was just these things, you drift apart.
Do you recall telling detectives in 2001 that Susan didn't take the breakup well?
I don't. that, but I think it may be true.
Okay.
It was hard on her.
If Susan didn't take it well, is it fair to say that potentially she wanted to stay together with you?
I think she would have been open to it, at least initially.
So is it a fair characterization then that you were the source of ending the relationship with Susan?
I would say I was the prime mover, but it was more than just me, but yes.
Okay. And how long was it approximately after the Strikers Affair project failed was it that you ended the relationship with Susan?
I guess about a year later, when I finally did get back to LA full time, 93, 94, right in that range,
Okay. And where did you live
I took a place over by the Pacific Palisade, the end of Sunset, overlooking at the end of Sunset. I had a place near the ocean.
then? And did your children go live with you at that point?
No, they stayed with her. Well, at that point, they were, young adults. They were 17, 18. They were in that range, and my son was heading off to school. My daughter wanted to stay with Susan and bonded with her, and I thought it was a good idea. I thought that she was good to have a mother figure and a woman who cared for her in her life. So yeah, she stayed with Susan for that at that time.
After that point in time, did either of your children ever live with you again?
Actually, no, that's right, that was it. I mean, well, as I say, my son was up and on his way, and then my daughter did come to live with me very briefly, and then went back to stay with Susan.
You said one was 17, one was 18.
In that range, yeah.
Is Sarah the older one?
He's the older one.
Okay. After you ended the relationship with Susan, and the children stayed living with her, did they stay living in the Brentwood home?
No, she, the home was sold. She got a place over in West Hollywood. Mela stayed with her. My son moved up to San Francisco, and he was commuting back and forth at the time, and that's the way,
Okay.
that's what we lived.
And Susan, Mela was living with Susan.
That's right.
Was she caring for her financial needs?
Well, Susan ran into some financial difficulty then, and again, I don't.
Can you direct the witness to listen to the question and answer and help on these soliloquies?
Oh, please forgive me, I'm sorry.
No, those are just the rules that you would need to listen to the question and answer only the question.
Only the question. Thank you.
Susan was like borrowing or renting that home. She didn't own it. That was hard.
It was, yes.
How large was that home?
It was a 2-bedroom.
Okay. Who was paying for Mela's food?
Well, I was sending money to Mela, so money that I sent her, and that was where she was getting her money from, as far as I know. I mean, that's just answer the question.
Okay. Do you know if Susan was actually paying rent in that apartment, or do you not know the financial arrangements she had?
I do not know the financial arrangements. Thank you.
Okay. How much did you talk to Susan after 1993, the relationship ended?
Excuse me, 1993?
When the relationship ended?
Not often, but we did stay in touch.
Did you always stay in touch with her after that point in time?
I would say so, yes.
Was there a period of time where you ceased communication with her?
Well, it became less frequent over the years.
Okay. Your testimony is you still had some contact with her?
Yes.
So I'm going to clip here, just want you to listen to it. Video 34. May I mark this as People's 39?
39.
39.
39A.
And the 1039A.
Yes.
Yeah, last contact. Yeah. And honestly, I don't remember exactly what last year, we still close, I assume we should get updates.
I got no updates from anyone regarding anything regarding the period, honestly.
No, I was not looking at.
Well,
Those are your statements.
yeah, that's my statement.
You pretty much ceased communication with Susan Berman after you guys broke up, didn't you?
Well, yes, but we did stay in touch. I mean, we did from time to time.
Well, did you communicate with Sarah at that point in time? Did you
Yes.
cease communications with him?
No.
How did you communicate with Mala if she was living with Susan?
Well, from time to time, I would go over to visit, and we would go out. I remember one particular incident. She had a car fixed or something, and I took her over and got her car repaired for her. And so I would see her that way, you know, and we would talk. But we were not close during that period. You know, we did not have a close relationship.
Okay. At some subsequent point, were you aware that Susan moved into a home with Benedict King?
Yeah, I remember when they did. Susan got that home with Benedict, yes.
Did Mela move with her for a
Yes,
period of
as
time?
far as I know, yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, did you ever go there?
I did.
How many occasions?
A couple of times.
Is it possible you've only been in that home on one occasion to pick up Mel?
No, I think I was there a couple of times, but I remember one time when I did come by together and we went out and had dinner and chatted.
Do you recall telling detectives in 2001 that you only entered the Benedict Canyon home on one occasion to pick up Mel?
I don't recall saying that. No.
Possibly so.
It's possible.
Had you ever met a man named Robert?
Of course.
Okay. When did you meet?
I met him, I guess it was around 1990, 91 when we first went to New York together, Susan and I, and that's when I met him.
Who introduced you?
Susan.
Okay. And you, I believe you just said you first met him in New York?
Yes.
Okay. How many times have you socialized together with Mr. Durst and Susan?
Well, at the time, and this is 1991, 92, several, I mean, many times we actually stayed at Mr. Durst's apartment in New York, the two of us, at one point.
Okay. How, based on your observations of Susan's and the defendant's interactions with each other, how would you characterize their relationship?
Their relationship, you said?
Yes.
They were very friendly. They were old friends, and she always spoke very highly of him.
Did you ever come to believe that they shared any secrets together?
No.
Was there anything you ever observed about how they interacted with each other that made you suspect that they shared any secrets together?
No, I'm just answering the question. I'm not going to ramble on. No, I did not see or have the feeling that they were sharing secrets together.
When you spoke with detectives in 2001, you recall that?
I do. I mean, I remember that interview. That was 17 years ago, so
Were you honest with detectives during that interview?
that's my ability. I try to be.
Did you tell detectives during that interview that Susan and Robert Durst would act like good friends, but at times acted like they had a dark secret together?
I may have said that. I don't recall it at this point, but I may have said that.
When you were speaking with detectives in 2001, were you being honest with them?
To the best of my ability, yes. I tried.
To the to the best of your memory. Did you lie to them about anything?
Not that I would.
Were some events more fresh in your mind then than they are today?
I'm sure that's true.
Did you do your best to did you honestly and accurately relay the information about those
To the
details?
best of my ability, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Do you understand? Sorry. Did Susan ever discuss with you Robert Durst's missing life?
She did.
Okay. When did you have this discussion with her?
We had this discussion once. It was on the plane going to New York when I was going to be meeting him for the first time.
And when you say him,
Mr. Durst.
Okay. And were you on the plane when you had this discussion?
Yes.
What did Susan tell you about Robert Durst's missing life?
Well, we were talking about scripts in regard to murder scripts and mobster ideas and people that had done things, etc. And in the course of that conversation, she mentioned to me, she said, by the way, you know, Mr. Durst killed his wife. And that is what she said to me.
Did she say what his wife did for him?
Not at that time. Later on, when, you know, during conversations in the future, I think they did mention she was a nurse or something. I'm not sure. Maybe.
Did she say anything to you at that time about the status of the relationship between Mr. Durst and his wife?
His wife? No, I don't think so.
Do you recall telling the detectives that Susan said that Mr. Durst's wife was a beautiful woman who was attending medical school and that she was going to leave him? And that he flipped out? Didn't mean to do it.
Maybe she did say that. Yeah, she might have said that. Yeah.
And she said here today, how strong is your memory that she told you that she actually knew that he killed his wife?
Well, she only mentioned that to me once in passing, and we were at that time, as I say, writing, where we would play a game with each other. What if? What if this happened? What if this person did that? And so when she made this comment to me, I did not particularly believe it or disbelieve it. It was not something that I, you know, had any huge reaction to at the time.
Well, did she say anything to you to indicate to you it was not true?
No, she did not.
Did she ever tell you that she was joking about it?
No, she did not.
Did she ever suggest that she was exaggerating this fact?
She did not.
Did she tell you that he killed his wife?
She did say that.
Can you think of any reason? Sure. Did she equivocate at all to you about how much information she had?
She never said any more about it than basically that. And it was, you know, and then we never really discussed it again. Later on, when I got to know Mr. Durst, and I heard about the fact that, you know, trial or investigation or something, and that nothing had come of it. For me, that was, you know, at that point, I just put it away.
Did she express to you how much information she had about what happened to Mr. Durst's missing wife?
Not that I recall.
Did she ever tell you she knew all about it?
Again, not that I recall, but that would not have been an impossible thing for her to say, I'll tell you that.
Do you recall telling Mr. Lewin with detectives that Susan told you she knew all about it?
I don't recall saying that, but again, it's not impossible that she would have made a statement like that.
When Mr. Lewin and detectives interviewed you initially, your initial response was, I really don't know anything.
Right.
You didn't initially volunteer this information, did you?
That is correct. I didn't want to say anything.
In fact, as questioning went on, you continued to not provide this information initially.
I tried to say as little as possible. I was hoping that I could say as little as possible, therefore not have to testify.
When detectives and Mr. Lewin came to your house, you knew they were there to ask you questions to try to figure out what happened to Susan Berman. Is that right?
That is correct.
You knew that at least Mr. Durst was suspected of killing Susan Berman. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
What was your answer, sir?
Yes, I did.
You knew that Mr. Durst had been suspected of being involved with his missing wife's disappearance.
That's correct.
And you knew that they were there to try to get to the truth of the matter.
That's correct.
Yet you didn't provide this information.
I did provide the truth once.
Well, you provided the truth once they confronted you with previous statements you made to detectives, did you not?
Yes, I started by saying I don't remember anything, and he said, "Oh, really? How about this?" I said, "Well, basically, you found me out," and then I, spilled the beans.
Okay. You didn't want to spill the beans because you don't want to be sitting here in court, right?
That is correct.
And you know that potentially there's going to be a trial in this case in the future.
I am aware of that.
And you are aware that if there's a trial in this case in the future, there'll be substantially more publicity than there is right now.
I'm aware.
You're aware that if there's a trial in this case, if cameras are allowed in the courtroom, it might turn into what you previously called a media circus.
That's correct.
And that's the last thing you want to happen. Is that not correct?
That's right.
And you are aware, are you not, that the more details you provide,
The media circus, absolutely, and then questioning him.
you are aware that the more details you provide, the more likely you are to find yourself in that seat again at trial.
Well, what can I do? I have to answer the questions.
Okay, but again, that's the last thing you really want to happen, is it not?
That's correct.
Okay. Did Susan tell you that Mr. Durst had told her that he killed his wife?
I don't think she said that. I think she simply said, he killed his wife, didn't he?
Have you previously told detectives that you think Mr. Durst said that he killed his wife to Susan?
I don't recall saying that, but I'm sure it's true since you asked it. You're going to play it for me right here.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Have you had many friends who talked to you about their killing their wives?
It's not a normal subject matter, that's for sure.
Well, was this the only time?
The only time.
Did you ask him? I'm sorry, did you ask her? Hey, how do you know this?
No, I didn't. Not at the time, for the reason that I have stated, which was I wasn't half sure she was telling me the truth because we were talking about imaginary circumstances regarding crimes and murders and such. And
You knew they were good friends.
yes, I did. And so I'm
So
sorry.
did you finish?
I think I finished.
Okay. You knew at the time she told you this, that this was one of her best friends.
Yeah, I did know that, yes.
And did you have any reason to think that she was making up this horrific fact about one of her best friends?
I did have a reason to think she might be making it up, and that doesn't mean that that it wasn't true, but I did have a reason to think that, yeah.
Do you believe that if you say that Susan told you Bob confessed this fact to her, that you are more or less likely to end up here testifying in trial?
Could you ask me that again? I'm not sure I understood what you were saying.
Sure. Do you believe
Yeah.
that if you testify today, that Susan told you that Bob Durst confessed to her that he killed his wife, that you are more or less likely to find yourself sitting here at trial?
Okay, no, I don't believe that. What I am attempting to do today is to tell the truth to the best of my recollection, remembering this took place 27 years ago, or thereabouts, and she did say that to me. And that was what she said. And that's where it stays, and that's what happened. Really.
We have one more here.
Yes.
We have one more here.
Yes.
As you sit here today, how certain are you that, forget about whether you believed it or not, how certain are you that Susan told you that Bob Durst killed his wife?
As I recollect, that is what she said.
Okay. How good was Susan at keeping secrets?
She could keep a secret? Yes, she could.
So, based on knowing Susan Berman, dating her for the years that you did, being around her all the time that you were, and watching her interact with people, has she had information such that she told you about Robert Durst? Do you believe that she would have kept that to herself?
Could you ask me that again?
So based on knowing Susan Berman, dating her for the years that you did, being around her all the time that you were, and watching her interact with people, had she had information such that she told you about Robert Durst, do you believe that she would have kept that to herself?
The answer is number one, I really don't know, but I would not be surprised if she told other people this.
So, your testimony today is you're not sure, but you wouldn't be surprised if she did. When you spoke with Mr. Lewin, didn't you say you would be shocked if she didn't?
I may have said that, but I wouldn't say that today,
Okay.
but I would say that it's possible, yeah.
Okay. Can you put more people's 40, please? Put in a
40A?
yes.
All right.
Listen to this.
If she told me she would tell other people, she did tell other people this. I'm not the only person she told this to. And in my presence, tell other people no.
It's interesting, how do you know that she's told other people?
Because I know Susan.
Okay? Well, actually, truthfully,
I told her she told other people, but I would be shocked if she did.
Were those your statements, Mr. Lewin? So were those your statements, Mr. Lewin?
My statements today, I'm trying to be careful.
Listen to my question.
What I said.
It's very apparent you're
I
trying
was
to be
getting
careful.
less careful then.
And when you say you're being, that's fine. Were those the statements you made, Mr. Lewin?
If they're there, absolutely, that's what I said.
Okay. And essentially, you're saying that you know Susan Berman,
Right.
and you'd be shocked if she didn't tell that to other people.
On the day I said that, that is exactly how I felt. Today, I wouldn't exactly characterize it that way.
And what's different today than from when you were spoken?
Well, I'm in a court, I'm under oath, and I'm going to carefully say what I say because I want to be as accurate as I can.
All right, thank you, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Valley and Mr. Moore, can you stipulate that the statement that he gave in March of 2001 is an accurate rendition of what the police report says, so that the mark of the defendant's one identification?
So what you're asking, we will stipulate that this is a report, because there's no one who authenticated it. You're free to question him what's based on this report. Does that give you the suit you need?
It does, thank you.
The court will accept that stipulation. You may proceed.
The same applies to the recorded
Yeah, and Mr. Chesnoff, as long as you tell us what you're referring to, you don't need to tell me in advance or ask for a stipulation. Any report or transcript you want to use, as long as you identify it, you have no issue. As long as the court does, and I assume the court doesn't. That's fine.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kaufman. My name is David Chesnoff, and I'm one of Mr. Durst's attorneys. I was interested, I'm from Las Vegas. The A&E show that you did you have a credit in that?
I did.
What was the title of it?
It was called The History of Las Vegas.
It was a segment that you did? Or?
Well, Susan and I developed the idea together and wrote a lot of it together, but that was when we were together. Then when we broke up, several years went by, she got involved with another producer. It finally came to be in production, and they approached me to give me a credit and a piece of, I got paid for my participation, etc.
Thank you. So how many years were you in a romantic relationship with Ms. Berman?
I would say from 87 or 88 to 92 or 93, right in there.
The two of you never got married?
No.
Okay, so you just lived together?
That's right.
And that was with your children?
That's right.
Okay. And you moved into her place, is that fair?
That's right.
Will you please wait until the question's over and then answer? Go ahead.
Thank you. This was a place that she owned?
That's right.
And she had a mortgage on it?
Correct.
And she had acquired the home?
As far as I know, yes.
And she had acquired the mortgage?
That's right.
She had qualified for it?
That's right.
You didn't buy the house, correct?
I did not buy it.
You were not on the mortgage, correct?
That's correct.
You did not help her qualify or provide any kind of guarantee, did you?
No.
And at this time, what were you doing for a paycheck?
Well, at that time, I had an income and I was not actively making a living, quote unquote. I was living on capital that I had.
Okay, how much capital did you have at that time?
Enough.
Quantify it. How much money did you have, Mr. Kaufman?
Well, it was more than $1 million.
More than $1 million? Was it in an IRA? Was it in an annuity?
I had investments of different sorts.
In the stock market?
Yes.
Did you file income tax returns?
I believe so, sure, of course.
During those years?
Yeah.
What was the name of your accountant? Name of your accountant at the time?
Well, I can see him, I don't recall his name. He was out in the valley.
Yeah. Mr. Kaufman, before today, we've never talked, correct?
That's right.
And before today, the only people you've ever talked to about this circumstance are either policemen or district attorneys, correct?
That's right.
Back at the time that Ms. Berman was murdered, it was the police that spoke to you, correct?
That's right.
And recently, as of 2015, it was police and Mr. Lewin, correct?
That's right.
And up until today, the only people that have ever spoken to you about this are the police and the district attorney, correct?
That is right.
And in fact, Mr. Lewin or one of the district attorneys or one of the policemen conveyed to you our wish to speak to you, did they not?
They did.
And you turned that request down, did you not?
I did.
Now I'm asking you, will you talk to me in the future, Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Will you talk to me in the future? Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufman.
There was no audible response.
He nodded in the affirmative.
Mr. Kaufman, I'll ask you again, if I give you a phone call or email, will you respond to me?
Okay, well, then in that case, let me think carefully about the answer to that.
Okay.
Look, I am here to tell the truth and to just be open and honest about everything. Whether I would accept your call or not, I would have to, I don't know what the answer should be to that. I don't have an answer.
I hope when I'm done you will. Thank you. So, did I read somewhere that you did some form of digital photography? Is that,
I am involved with that, yes, one of the things I
okay,
did.
is that something you were doing back in the 80s and
There
90s?
was no digital anything back then.
Were you a photographer back then?
Of a sort.
Tell us about that.
Well, I used to take pictures.
For money?
I don't think I could pay for it.
Now, when you were interviewed in March of 2001 by the Beverly Hills Police Department, that's really the only time that they interviewed you back then, isn't it?
That's correct, I believe.
Mr. Chesnoff, I think you said Beverly Hills Police Department. Beverly Hills.
I'm sorry?
You You said Beverly Hills.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Matt.
LA Police Department. That was back in March of 2001, correct? Did anybody speak to you between Christmas of 2000 and that interview from the police?
No.
So even though your children had lived with Miss Berman, and even though you had been in a long-standing relationship with her, up until March, not a single policeman spoke to you about her homicide, correct?
That's right. So in other words, 2001, I did the interview with the police, and there was never anything else until the day Mr. Lewin came to the door.
Did you contact the police after your daughter informed you that Susan had been murdered to say, I'd like to help?
No, I did not.
You waited till you were contacted in March.
That's right.
But up until that time, not a single police officer had done anything in the course of investigating Miss Berman's death to interview you, ask you questions, anything like that, correct?
As I recall.
Have you been shown your interview from March of 2001?
No, I have not.
Okay, so before the interview that Mr. Lewin and the police did, they didn't give you a copy of a police report and tell you, this is what you said in the past, would you like to review it?
No, they did not.
At any time after you gave the interview in March of 2001, did the police ever provide you with a copy of your statement?
They did not.
Was your interview that was done in 2001 recorded?
I assume it was.
Did you see a tape recorder?
I did not.
Has anybody ever played a tape of that conversation for you?
No.
Now, Susan was doing pretty well for herself because of Easy Street. Would that be a fair statement?
I mean, yes, for a time, I guess.
The book was well received,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
And it was about her life as the child of someone who was involved with organized crime in Las Vegas when Las Vegas was developed.
Yeah.
And so she knew a lot about gangsters,
That's right.
and she talked about it all the time.
That's correct.
And that's consistent with your answer earlier that you were on a plane playing a word game you did for creative purposes, and she was telling you something involving gangsters or murder. That's the way that happened,
That's
correct?
correct.
And so at the time you weren't even sure that it had anything to do with reality, but rather the game that you played with her.
I wasn't sure. That's right.
And you oftentimes played these kind of creative games with your co-author, correct?
Well, at that time we were doing it. It wasn't all the time, but it just so happens that was one of the reasons this came up, because we were talking about murders, gangsters, events of that sort, and so that's why she brought this up.
When she talked to you about her dad, did she tell you that her dad had been murdered?
Yes, she did.
Okay. And did you subsequently find out that her dad had died in a hospital from some complication from the surgery?
That's right.
So she had made that up.
No, we're not making it up.
So on the one hand, she told you that her dad had been murdered, correct? Say yes?
Yes, that's right.
And then subsequently you learned that he may have died in a hospital from complications from surgery, correct?
Not exactly. She told me that he had been murdered in that hospital.
Oh, I see. So the hospital conspired to kill her father.
Well, I don't know what happened, but her story was that one way or another, they arranged that during that hospital stay, he didn't get out.
As far as her mom goes, did she also tell you that her mom was murdered?
She did.
Did she subsequently tell you that her mother had not been murdered but had taken her own life?
She might have. I'm not certain.
Would it be fair to say that when you were working with Ms. Berman, she would also often embellish on facts? Is that fair?
That's fair.
Ms. Berman and Mr. Durst have been friends, as far as you know, from having gone to college together at UCLA,
That's right.
and they were very close, as you described, correct?
Correct.
Did she occasionally, to your knowledge, aside from the money that Mr. Durst gave you guys for your show, receive some financial help from Mr. Durst?
Not that I'm specifically aware of, although it may have happened. Again, I would not be surprised if it happened.
Now, this money that Mr. Durst gave to you for the production of the Scoundrel D, that's the name of it, right? The Scoundrel D?
We called it Dreyfus in the end, but that was Scoundrel D at one point, you're right.
And I think Mr. Fuhrer, the dad, he was a famous producer of Guys and Dolls, maybe?
That's right.
And then the son was also was a musician,
A musician, yes.
Will you wait?
The son was a musician. So the hypothesis of the play was to make a musical version of the Dreyfus Affair, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and that was a famous historical event involving false accusations by the police against a Jewish fellow who was an officer in the military in France, right?
That's correct.
And it turned out to be a complete fabrication of what had occurred, correct?
Correct.
Called him a traitor and he wasn't, etc., correct?
That is it.
So you were looking for folks to help you raise funds in order to do what we call a pre-production of the play to see if you could get the kind of support you would need to make it a real show, either Broadway or off-Broadway, correct?
That is accurate.
Okay. And so you went to different people that would have financial resources, correct?
Correct.
And one of the reasons that you were going to meet Mr. Durst in New York was because of the fact that Mr. Durst was well off, close to Susan, and might help you, correct?
That was not the reason.
Not the reason, but part of the reason?
Not really, it was almost secondary. I mean, she was a friend of his, and in the process of doing the show, I met him and he became involved. He was not the focus of this in any way.
And he gave you $20,000 to $25,000 to help, correct?
As I now recall, that is right.
Okay. After Susan told you what you said, she said while you were kibitzing on the airplane, did you say, you know what, Susan? We can't keep this $25,000 from Mr. Durst. He told me he killed his wife. Did you ever say that to her?
No, I did not.
Did you ever try to return the money to Mr. Durst? Because you were so convinced that he had committed a murder? Did you ever try to return the money?
Number one, I did not try to return the money, and it had nothing to do with the murder or not the murder.
Okay, but you don't strike me as the kind of fellow that's going to keep money from a murderer, are you?
I wouldn't know.
Now, Scoundrel D never opened on Broadway, did it?
That's correct. And we did previews.
It eventually was financially untenable to continue, correct?
That's right.
And during this time, you and Ms. Berman kind of grew apart. Is that fair?
Not at that time. After that time.
How much after that time?
Over the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Do you remember meeting with the police in March of 2001 and saying the following? Kaufman stated that the musical did not do well and ended in 1993. Kaufman returned to Los Angeles and told Berman that their relationship was over and he was moving out. Remember telling that to the police?
I do, but that's a truncated version of what happened.
So if the police had a truncated version of what occurred?
That's right.
Okay. Not a truncated version of what you said to them?
That's right.
You remember telling the police that Ms. Berman did not take the breakup of the relationship well?
I don't remember saying that, but it was very emotional when we broke up.
Okay. Do you remember telling the police that Ms. Berman had poisoned the relationship that you had with your children?
I don't remember saying that. But if you're bringing it up, I will grant you that probably you have it on record, but I don't recall.
Well, I want you to read it. So
Okay.
It's at the bottom of the page, about the 5th line from the bottom. Let's see what I can say.
Poison his children?
You see it?
Yeah.
for identification, L, and I'll provide a clean copy to the clerk when we're finished. Now, she had grown very close with your children, correct?
That's right.
And your children's birth mother had, for lack of a better way of putting it, left all of you?
She was no longer involved with their life at that time.
She went to Hawaii,
That's right.
left you with the kids,
That's right. I was a single parent.
right? And then when you moved in with Ms. Berman became a surrogate mom,
That is right.
and a very good one.
And a good one.
Okay. But, much to your chagrin, she poisoned your relationship with your kids, correct?
At that time, some of that did happen, but it was not the way I think. The phrase poisoned mischaracterizes it really. I mean,
Well, she said some pretty nasty things
she
about you.
did. That's what happens when you break up.
Okay, but she made up things about you to your kids, didn't she?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, your kids stopped talking to you for a period of time, correct?
Not really. We stayed in touch, but not as much.
And well, did you see them once a week?
Well, it depends on what period of time you're
Okay,
talking.
well, at the time you broke up and she was poisoning your children against you, did you see her once a week?
At the time that we broke up, I was in touch with my son, who was up in San Francisco, and remained in touch with him, went up to visit him. As to my daughter, less in touch with her for a period of time, several months, I guess it was. And then we did get back in touch together, and we're in touch off and on, but it was not, ongoing, active communication.
Would you concede that it was strained?
Oh, yes.
And that was, in your mind, in part because Ms. Berman had said things about you to your kids that were not true.
That's correct. It didn't help. That's right.
And in fact, Ms. Berman had a reputation about saying things about people to hurt them for her advantage, didn't she?
I would not say that.
Remember describing Ms. Berman as kind of like a Hedda Hopper or Rona Barrett type? For Mr. DeGuerin and I, we know who that is, the younger people might not, but did you remember saying that to the police?
Oh, yeah, she was like that.
And that was kind of a gossipy, harsh person who said what she needed to say in order to draw attention to herself. Did you say that?
I would not characterize it with the words you just chose.
How would you characterize it?
I would say she was a Class A reporter, and she could cut to the chase, and she could be cutting, and she could be very incisive. One of the things I appreciated about her, actually.
Okay. But she wasn't incisive when she was poisoning your children against you, was she?
Yeah.
Excuse me? Yes or no?
I don't know. I wasn't there to see what she was saying, but it didn't help.
Well, she certainly had an impact on your kids, correct?
She did.
And that she'd grown close to them, correct?
That's right.
And she had driven a wedge between you and your own children.
To a degree.
Susan had a lot of friends, true?
Yes.
But she also had a lot of people who didn't like her. Is that a fair statement?
I would not be able to say that, but it would be possible to be turned off by her upon meeting her. Not everybody was a big fan, but people that tend to be, as witty and capable as she was, that tends to happen to people.
Well, at the time that Mela told you that Susan had been murdered, you told the police you were shocked, but you weren't surprised, correct?
That's right.
Now, there's several reasons why you might not be surprised. One would be if you did it, right? Right?
No.
Mr. Kaufman, when you were meeting with Mr. Lewin and the police, and they asked you if you knew anything, as you told Mr. Valley and correct, the first thing you said to them was, I don't know anything.
That's right. That's what I said.
Now, there's two policemen there, correct? Yes?
That's right.
There's a district attorney, correct?
Right?
Not a shy fellow, right? Correct?
Right.
much looking to get answers to his questions, correct? Yes?
That's right.
And you looked at all three of those people, and you lied, correct?
Incorrect. What I said was,
I don't know anything.
I don't know anything, at which point Mr. Lewis said to me, he said something about, well, we have this quote, at which point I then said, okay, well, I'll tell you anything you want to know.
You're saying that in your taped conversation, you told Mr. Lewin that you would tell him anything you knew? Did you say that?
I don't know if I used those exact.
Because you're under oath here
I
too.
do understand. I don't know if I used those exact.
So let me ask it to you again. When you were asked the question if you knew anything, you said, I don't know anything, correct? Correct?
That's right.
And that was not true at the time, was it?
Until the next question.
No, it was not true at the time, correct?
I don't know anything, really, except for what I'm telling you.
Okay, I appreciate that part, but at the time you looked the three law enforcement people in the eye, you told them something that was not true, correct?
You'll have to define not knowing anything.
The question was asked, you were the one who said it, I didn't say it. You said you talked to them and told them you didn't know anything, correct?
That was my response.
And in fact, in your mind, you now believe you do know something, whatever that might be, correct?
Correct.
So I know this is hard, and I'm not trying to be mean, but when you said, I don't know anything, you were not telling the truth, correct?
I was withholding things that I knew.
From two policemen and a prosecutor.
Until they
correct?
said, you gotta tell us.
But you were withholding it, correct?
At that moment.
Even though they were investigating the death of a woman who had taken you into her home, correct?
She did not take me into her home, that's a mischaracterization.
Well, when you moved into her house, was it your house or her house?
Well, it became our house.
So when you moved in, was it her
It was
house?
her house at that moment.
Okay, and she took your children under her roof, correct? Yes or no?
We all moved in together, yes.
Okay. So that's who they were investigating the death of, correct?
Correct.
And when they asked you if you knew anything, you told them a lie, right, Mr. Kaufman?
I would not characterize it that way.
Did you say, you know what, I really want to help you in any way I can?
I did say that.
You did?
Yes, in fact, as soon as they said, look, we have your statement, I said, okay, I don't want to say anything, and here's why. And I told them why, as I'm telling you right now. I did not want to have to testify if I didn't have to.
Would you agree that Mr. Lewin had to ask you things in a very, very pointed way in order to get you to answer, Mr. Kaufman?
No, he made one statement. He said, you know, I think you're trying to withhold things here from me. And he said, you're not answering the questions. And he said, he confronted me with that, and my answer was, you're 100% correct. And I think that's actually in there. At which point I said, you're 100% correct. I don't want to say anything. And then he said, really? Why? And I told him why. I was afraid. I did not want to be involved with a major trial and all that publicity for myself and my family.
You also asked him if you were a suspect and if you needed a lawyer, right, Mr.
I
Kaufman?
did say that, absolutely.
You had concerns for yourself, correct, Mr. Kaufman?
I had concerns only for the fact that if I was going to be brought into a legal situation, perhaps I should get an attorney. That's what I was concerned
So you're
about.
sitting with two policemen and a prosecutor, they're investigating the death of someone who you lived with, who took care of your children, and in your mind, the question that came to the forefront was, do I need a lawyer? Right?
No, the question that came to my mind is, do I really have to talk about this? And he basically said, yes, you do, at which point I said, okay, and I did.
You wanted to know if you would be called to testify, did you not?
I did want to know that that was my concern.
Now, one of the policemen told you, I don't believe so. Do you remember that?
He said, I don't believe what?
I don't believe so. You won't have to be called. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. That's what I was hoping.
But in spite of his reassurance, you're here, aren't you?
That's right. The last thing I said to Mr. Lewin that day was, I beg you, please don't call me. I don't want to have to go to court. He said, well, we'll see. And that's the way we left it.
Earlier, I asked you if you had talked to us, and you said, had told the district attorney you didn't want to talk to us, correct?
Not because it was you.
Well, I'm not taking it personally.
But, no, I
The
didn't want
others are, though.
I didn't want to come in and have to do discovery and all, since you already have my statement. I said, look, you already have what I said. I'm just going to come in and say what I said and speak the truth. I wanted to, cut to the chase and come here and say it, that's all.
And then Mr. Lewin told you that if you refused us, and we still tried to talk to you, then you should report us. Remember that?
He did not say report you. He said, would you? He asked me politely, he said, would you, if you do get contacted by the defense, would you contact us? I said, I absolutely will. And I also said, I don't want to speak to the defense, not because I'm pro or anti anything. I just don't want to be involved any more degree than I have to. That's the truth.
Mr. Kaufman, let me ask you this. Do you remember expressing concern that the police being at your building with Mr. Lewin might draw attention to you, to your neighbors,
Yeah.
and you were concerned that they might think you were being arrested? Remember saying that?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, they showed up, they didn't call first because they didn't have my number evidently. So they came to the building, met with the manager, and suddenly there's a knock on the door. And my God, I mean, what's going on here? I got the police and the lawyers, everybody's at my door. It was alarming.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Kaufman. You never talked directly to Bob Durst about anything to do with his wife, did you? Never. So you never had any conversations with Mr. Durst about that whatsoever?
No.
Okay. Anything that you testified to about Mr. Durst and his wife would have come from Susan, correct?
That's right.
Okay, you have absolutely no personal knowledge whatsoever of anything involving Bob. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
You remember telling Mr. Lewin and the police, I have nothing to tell you about Bob Durst?
I don't recall saying it, but it's true.
Was Susan friends with Kim Langford and Susan Harmon?
Oh, yes.
Closer with them, in your opinion, than with Linda Opes?
I would not get into
Vague as to
Did you know Linda Opes? Did you know Linda Opes?
I have not.
And did you meet her in the company of Susan?
I don't believe so.
You were separate.
I did not know her. I knew of her, and then years later, I did.
Do you think, was she a close friend of Susan's? to
My
your knowledge?
understanding is that she was a friend of Susan's.
A friend?
Yeah.
Now, you told us earlier that on this airplane ride, Susan mentioned a single fact about Bob and his wife. Is that right?
A statement, yes.
Now, you also said the following to the police. Well, let's go back. That you told Mr. Lewin and the policeman that one fact about the airplane ride, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But you also told them this, did you not? But I got to tell you something that will shock you. Mr. Lewin says, okay, and you say, it didn't shock me, that being the statement about Bob, because she would say crazy things all the time. She lied, she exaggerated, she embellished for her purposes. You remember telling him that?
I may have said that.
Do you agree with that statement?
In the present moment, I would modify it, but there is truth in it.
By the way, I think I asked you this, but when you were interviewed by Mr. Lewin and the police, that was recorded, correct?
I didn't know. I think, yes, I assumed it was.
You didn't know at first, but then...
I think he put the tape right on the table, if I remember correctly.
Do you remember telling Mr. Lewin the following? And with her, when she said stuff like that to me, I would go, oh, really? Yeah? You know what's for lunch? In other words, you took it with a grain of salt, didn't you?
This is true.
Do you remember telling Mr. Lewin? She said all kinds of crazy things. I'm not taking a stand that I believe her or not believe her. Do you remember telling Mr. Lewin that?
I don't remember it, but I could have said that.
Do you agree with that now?
Basically, she was capable of saying all kinds of things, that's true. I was part of her charm.
By the way, when you heard this on the airplane, when you got off the plane, did you call 911?
No,
Did you go to the newspapers?
absolutely.
Go to a private investigator?
Nothing.
Go to Sarah and Ella and tell them?
No, as I told you, I didn't particularly necessarily know whether it was true or not.
Court's indulgence, please. Remember telling Mr. Lewin that you were uncomfortable giving opinions about whether or not what Susan says is true or not?
I do remember that, and I am uncomfortable about it.
So, Mr. Kaufman, if I haven't managed to offend you and I try to get a hold of you, I hope that you'll respond. I have some other things that I'd like to discuss with you that may help us really find out what happened to Susan.
You don't have to talk to anybody you want to talk to.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kaufman.
All right, there's, okay, additional questions?
May I have one more?
You may.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes.
your testimony today is that you didn't know if you believe the statement or not. Susan told you that she could embellish, she could exaggerate.
That's correct.
And that was the statement you gave to Mr. Lewin and the two detectives when they came to your home.
I said that that is what she said to me, and evidently I've been reminded that I probably said at that time, and I wouldn't be surprised, but on the other hand, I had no way of knowing.
Okay. My question to you is, you never made that statement that Susan was exaggerating and embellishing this when you spoke to the detectives in 2001,
Oh, okay.
correct?
I don't recall, that was 17 years ago, and I don't recall what I said at that specifically.
Well, were you more concerned with ending up in court and kind of watching what you said in 2001, or when you spoke to Mr. Lewin?
Well, I was much more concerned when Mr. Lewin came. Back in 2001, I wasn't thinking much of anything.
Hey, nothing.
Mr. McCross?
No, thank you.
And the witness, please excuse. Any objection? Excuse the witness.
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on, I can't even read.
May the witness be excused? May the witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
Mark the exhibits, please.
Yes, I have a 2-page document, 111B. This is an exhibit sheet, correlates what's in the video versus new exhibits for trial. 111C is a 1-page photograph. The remaining 7 exhibits from the video are all 2-page documents. 35A is now 111D. 36A is now 111E. 37A is now 111F. 38A is now 111G. 39A is now 111H. 40A is now 111I. And defense L is now 111J.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen. We'll resume tomorrow we'll resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Thank you. Have a good evening. Counsel off the record suggested that I look through medical records and review the letter of Dr. Klein to see if there is a sufficient showing such that we ought to proceed further on the issue of the defendant's health, which is manifested in a motion for a mistrial, which I denied, motion for adjournment, which I denied this morning. And I did, however, agree that part of the reason was there was no showing. And Mr. Lewin was, and the people were good enough to stipulate that I might consider this letter by Dr. Klein as if he had testified to the same, and the medical records in support of his opinion. So I've looked through the medical records, but Dr. Klein described reading them very rapidly. Obviously, he is able to, he knows what he's looking for. I, on the other hand, am familiar with medical records, but of course, for me to go through them is a longer process. There's no way this is going to support a mistrial. The only question is whether there's sufficient showing for adjournment that the people ought to respond, that they ought to have a burden to present evidence from the treating physicians or some other form of evidence. That's a question you've given me, but I think I need to. First of all, I mean, always there's a legal context for the factual determination. So the legal context here is effective assistance of counsel, and for reasons I've described, I don't see that as implicated to the extent that there is a denial of the assistance of counsel. The second idea would have to be due process. And due process concerns with proceeding to trial with a person who is infirm or is ill is discussed in California in the context of People versus Avila, which is the authority I must follow, the only authority I have. The defense has urged me that it's inapplicable, or it is distinguishable because the maladies Mr. Avila suffered from, headaches and back problems, are different in character in that they're not life-threatening, whereas what's described here is ultimately life-threatening. A number of the maladies here are ultimately could be terminal. And I've been pointed to federal authorities, a federal district court's ruling, but actually the federal district court is applying other principles to give a due process analysis. I don't think I'm bound by that. I think that it's may be persuasive. So that's my context. I have one report, and that's where I'm at right now. I can't say that I'm ready to rule at this moment about whether the people need to rebut it. I think I need to think about it. After all, this is there's been no notice of this motion. It's And I understand that. You're basing that on an event that happened last week. So there's hardly time for you to prepare this, and I don't condemn you for it. As I explained earlier, that I need time to review these things. I don't have the practice of ruling instantly on important matters. I need to reflect. I need to look at the cases, and I need to think more. So we're at the threshold question of whether or not there's even a sufficient showing that these are plausible, that an adjournment is plausible under the circumstances where, notwithstanding this description of his maladies, I know, or under the sheriff's protocol, that they have delivered him to court, that they did take him to the hospital when that was necessary, that they will take him to the hospital if he needs treatment. They will provide him with treatment in custody. I'm aware of all of that. The contention that that is not sufficient, and even under the best of circumstances, any trial places him in jeopardy of some traumatic event, that he could have a heart attack or a stroke or any number of consequences. And so I'm aware of that. So that's what I'm working with now. I don't know what else you can give me right now to help me, other than what you've given me already. You've painted a picture of his health that is bleak. I mean, his ultimate. Ultimately, his condition is a very concerning. But as Avila says, there's nothing the court can do that will change that. The question is whether he is at immediate risk of a dramatically worsening health because of the fact that he is in a trial. And again, and pointing even to your case of Duran, this federal case, 328 Federal Supplement 1261 at 1263, among the factors Duran describes is the gravity and importance of the case. The court wrestles with that philosophical question, well, isn't every case as important as the other? I think what the court is trying to suggest is that, and it comes to the conclusion that in that case, a mail fraud was not so important that a person should suffer the way Mr. Duran was suffering. He shouldn't, and the trial was adjourned. Here we have a case that's enormous in its impact on the community, on witnesses, on a huge number of people are affected by how we proceed. A great number of people are affected by proceeding or not proceeding, not with their lives, but with there's great disturbance to people's lives by delaying. So I think in that to that extent, that factor weighs heavily against a delay. The other factors were the nature of the illness, and there are other factors that I just need to weigh.
Just very briefly in response, the concern that we have is that obviously no one is saying that Mr. Durst is not elderly and has not suffered and has significant medical issues. If we go back in 2003, roughly, he had serious cancer and was not expected at that point in time to survive that. He has survived another 20 years. Dr. Klein has stated that, in fact, had he reviewed those reports then, he would have stated that, said that, he would have looked and said, yep, don't think he's probably going to be around in approximately 20 years. So I think the reason that's important is that the court, and the court was very, I think, accurate in its assessment, court's a judge. And the medical people at County USC, and listen, the defense is, they have to do what they have to do, and they've made their arguments, and, they've maligned the care. But let's face it, contrary to what they wrote, they're the ones who discovered Mr. Durst's bladder cancer. They discovered it. They treated it. Mr. Durst is on record in his jail calls explaining what the great medical care that he was getting there. So our position in the end is pretty much this. In the end, the entity that needs to be making the initial decision is County USC, the doctors there. They are saying this man can come to court. In fact, when he couldn't come to court, they're the ones that found him, in other words, diagnosed him, treated him, got rid of the immediate condition that he was dealing with, got him back to a position where he could come here. He now has a catheter. Again, having a urinary tract infection is certainly unpleasant. Most of what Dr. Klein writes about, when you really break it down, is in essence, Bob Durst is a sick man, he's elderly, and in the future, who knows how long until it turns into something worse. But in the end, Your Honor, our position is it's a slippery slope and a difficult task for the court to, in essence, try to assume the role of a physician and say, okay, the doctors are saying he's okay to be here, but I'm going to find that he isn't. So our position is, Your Honor, unless and until the doctors say he shouldn't be here, that's when, by the way, there should be a hearing. Because then the court has to balance how serious is it, et cetera. But for right now, and the defense, other than the allegations they've made, Mr. Durst is showing up to court. Mr. Durst, as the court can observe, was able to communicate, write letters, write notes to his attorney. He appears to be alert. He appears to be following the proceedings. So our position would be that there should not be a hearing. I should have one other thing, I don't want to forget it. I was told that the date of the 24th, which we had discussed, the doctors are unavailable that we would need. They indicated to me, Your Honor, if the court is inclined to set such a date in the future, what they related to me was that they're not available on, let me just look here. They're not available on the 24th, 25th, or 29th. They said other dates in June, okay. The other thing that is important to make sure the court's aware of is, I found out and I advised counsel, the 22nd, which is Tuesday, at 10:30, Mr. Durst apparently has a cardio workup. That is going to be, obviously, we're in court that day, and I'm assuming that the reason they're doing it that day is that that's when the cardio team is available. We are supposed to be playing that day only video. I suggested to counsel during the examination, I told them that obviously Mr. Durst has a right to be here. Our position would be that if they're saying they want to be dark for that day, that's certainly appropriate. If on the other hand, Mr. Durst wants to waive his appearance while the videos are played, they could certainly do that, and I think they are going to figure that out. I just wanted to make sure that I brought those two issues forward to the court so I did not forget them.
Thank you. Mr. DeGuerin or Mr. Chesnoff, do you care to reply?
We're happy for the court to review the records, to review the report. I would say that it's not as the doctors at USC thought he was capable of coming to trial. There was one doctor that wrote a discharge summary and removed 3 intravenous needles from his arm in order to send him back to the jail.
The only thing I would add, Your Honor, is that Mr. Lewin stated that... I'm sorry. Mr. Lewin stated that Mr. Durst was alert, and I would like the record to reflect that on at least 2 occasions today he's nodded off.
I did see him nod off one time, substantially. Maybe there was another time, but that was during he did nod off. I don't recall if that was during one of the lawyers who testified to the consistent statement or if it was during the video. I think it was during one of the young lawyers.
I think it was the prosecutor, the ADA, which may have been a message.
He has been writing notes actively when otherwise. So as far as, I'm looking at U.S. versus Duran and the factors they describe, I mean, even to the extent I find this persuasive. So the issues are, one, the medical evidence and judgments, which Dr. Klein's evidence is present. It's obviously it's a critical of what has taken place, so he claims that there is concurrence of other doctors in his judgment. So I would say that's divided, although there is obviously medical evidence of a serious condition. Secondly, the related evidence of his activities at work or play outside the courthouse, that's not relevant here. 3, the availability of measures, shortened schedule, medication, medical equipment to minimize the risk to his health and subjecting him to trial, and that's really what Avila calls for. That's the connection to the California law, and here we're going 4 days a week, not 5. We are showing videos half the time. He is receiving some medication and could have more, except for the concern about him not being as alert if he had more pain medication. Medical equipment, he does have medical equipment with him that we try to conceal with a blanket, his catheter. And I've said that if you needed to take a break before cross-examination, you haven't availed yourself of that, but I'm in the right case, if you needed to, in the right instance, with the right witness, of course you can do that. I've already said you could. For the temporary or permanent character of the physical problem, since postponement is a relatively easy, bearable, and obvious measure for the case of curable impairments. And here again, we intersect with Avila. Mr. Avila's condition was incurable. I don't see that the court can ever cure Mr. Durst, or the jail will cure him. Everything is always extending life. It's reducing pain, extending life. That's the point, but he's not going to be cured of these things. 5, the magnitude and seriousness of the case, the degree of loss or injury to the public interest deemed to result from delay or total preclusion of a trial. This is not a mail fraud. This is a capital murder where we have more than 100 witnesses who are involved, and a matter of great import to the community, a trial that takes several months, a lot of moving parts. So that does weigh against any delay. So what I need to consider is weighing 3, 4, and 5 against factor number 1. Factor number 1, where the evidence has been provided by one side, but there's sort of a presumption in favor of the other side because the court's aware and takes judicial notice of the protocol that we've seen in place where he was not brought to court when he could not make it to court. So I'm going to take it under submission.
We would ask the court, I know the court's doing this under Evidence Code Section 664. I think that's what the court is doing, that an official duty is presumed to have been performed.
Thank you, Mr. Lewin.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Okay, well.
Your Honor, with respect to the issue of the 24th, so that means we won't be able to do the hearing that day because we won't have witnesses if the court decides to do a hearing. But also, can the court inquire about the 22nd? That's Tuesday.
We'll talk about it.
Okay.
And discuss it with Mr. Durst
Great.
and give you an answer.
Sure, and listen, he heard the testimony of these folks at the conditional examination, so I would accept a 977 B waiver if proffered for the appropriate time. If you want to have that in hand to present as needed, I'm not at all. He has a right to be here. I'm just saying that's something to keep in mind that you may want to use. All right, with that, I'd like to see you tomorrow before the jury comes. So 8:45, because I've taken this under submission. If I have an answer for you, I will.
Thank you.
Give it to you then. All right?
Thank you.
Department 1, anything else? All right, Department 1, adjourned.